Welcome to Pedia World, your ultimate destination for powerful book summaries, life-changing ideas, and practical knowledge. Let's dive into today's book. Have you ever finished a book, closed it, and then realized you barely remember what you just read? You remember a few lines, maybe a story or two, but the deeper ideas, they're gone. It can feel frustrating, almost disappointing. You invested your time, your energy, maybe even your excitement, and yet, nothing truly stuck. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Most of us were never actually taught how to read a book. We were taught how to recognize words, how to pronounce sentences, how to pass exams. But no one really showed us how to read in a way that transforms us. That's exactly where How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren comes in. This isn't just a book about reading. It's a book about thinking. It's about waking up your mind while you read. It's about turning reading from a passive activity into an active conversation between you and the author. And once you understand this shift, everything changes. In this summary, we're going to explore what it truly means to become an active reader. Because reading isn't just about moving your eyes across a page. It's about asking questions. It's about challenging ideas. It's about agreeing, disagreeing, and sometimes even arguing with the author. Imagine sitting across from the writer at a table, having a deep, meaningful discussion. That's what real reading feels like. Adler explains that there are different levels of reading, and most people never move beyond the most basic one. We skim, we consume, we highlight random sentences and feel productive. But deep down, we know we're not really engaging. This book teaches you how to go deeper, how to inspect a book before diving in, how to understand its structure, how to identify the author's main arguments, and most importantly, how to evaluate those arguments for yourself. There's something empowering about that. When you truly understand a book, you don't just gain information, you gain clarity. You sharpen your thinking. You become more confident in your opinions. You stop being easily influenced because you know how to analyze ideas instead of simply accepting them. In a world overflowing with information, that skill is priceless. Think about the last powerful book you read. What if you could squeeze every ounce of insight from it? What if you could remember it clearly months or even years later? What if every book you read made you wiser, more articulate, more thoughtful? That's not wishful thinking. It's a skill. And like any skill, it can be learned. This book also challenges a common myth that reading faster automatically means reading better. In reality, true understanding often requires slowing down. It requires effort. It requires attention. And yes, it requires patience. But the reward is profound. Instead of just finishing books, you start mastering them. As we go through this summary, you'll begin to see reading in a completely new light. You'll understand the 4 levels of reading, from basic to syntopical reading. You'll learn how to approach different kinds of books, whether they're practical, philosophical, scientific, or fictional, and you'll discover how to ask the right questions that unlock deeper meaning. By the end of this video, you won't just know what How to Read a Book is about. You'll feel inspired to change the way you read forever. Because once you become an active reader, every book becomes an opportunity for growth. Every page becomes a chance to think more clearly. And every idea becomes a stepping stone toward becoming a better version of yourself. So if you're ready to stop just reading words and start understanding ideas, if you're ready to turn reading into a powerful mental workout, then let's dive in and master the art of active reading together. Begins with a simple but powerful idea. Most people don't actually know how to read. That might sound surprising at first. After all, we've been reading since childhood. We learned the alphabet, we practiced pronunciation, we passed exams. But according to Mortimer Adler, that's only the beginning. Real reading, the kind that builds understanding, sharpens thinking, and changes your perspective, is something entirely different. Adler makes it clear that reading is not a passive activity. It's not about sitting back and letting words wash over you. It's not about finishing pages quickly just to say you've completed a book. True reading is active. It demands effort. It requires you to participate. In fact, he argues that reading is a conversation between you and the author. And like any meaningful conversation, both sides have to contribute. Think about it. When you're talking to someone face to face, you don't just stare at them silently. You listen carefully. You ask questions. You clarify when something doesn't make sense. You agree or disagree. You respond. That's exactly how reading should work. The author presents ideas, arguments, and insights. Your job as a reader is to engage with them, to question, to analyze, and to truly understand. In this first chapter, Adler also introduces a powerful distinction between reading for information and reading for understanding. Reading for information is easy. You're simply collecting facts. You're absorbing something new, but it doesn't necessarily stretch your mind. For example, reading a news article or a simple blog post might give you information you didn't know before, but it doesn't challenge your thinking deeply. Reading for understanding, however, is different. This happens when the book is slightly above your current level of knowledge. It forces you to think harder. It pushes you to connect ideas. Sometimes it even makes you uncomfortable because you don't immediately grasp everything. And that's the point. Growth only happens when you move beyond what's easy. Adler explains that the goal of good reading is to elevate your understanding, to move from a lower level of knowledge to a higher one. And this only happens when you actively work through difficult ideas. It's not about speed. It's not about quantity. It's about depth. He also emphasizes responsibility. Many readers blame the book when they don't understand something. They say, "This book is too complicated," or "The author isn't clear." While that can sometimes be true, Adler challenges us to look at ourselves first. Have we made the effort? Have we asked the right questions? Have we tried to break down the argument step by step? This idea is empowering because it puts control back in your hands. Your understanding doesn't depend only on the author's skill. It depends on your effort as a reader. When you approach a book with curiosity and discipline, you unlock more from it. You turn reading into a mental workout instead of a casual activity. Another important idea in this chapter is that reading well is a skill, and like any skill, it can be improved. Nobody is born a great reader. It's developed through practice, attention, and intention. The more consciously you read, the better you become at understanding complex ideas. Chapter 1 sets the foundation for everything that follows. It shifts your mindset. It challenges the way you see reading. Instead of treating books as something to consume quickly, you begin to see them as opportunities for dialogue and growth. You realize that every serious book demands something from you. Your focus, your patience, your thinking. And once you accept that reading is active, not passive, everything changes. You stop rushing. You start questioning. You begin reading not just to finish, but to understand. And that simple shift marks the beginning of mastering the art of active reading. Adler takes us deeper into an idea that completely reshapes the way we see reading. He explains that reading is not a single skill, it's a layered process. There are different levels of reading, and each level requires a different kind of effort. Most people never move beyond the most basic level, not because they can't, but because they don't even realize higher levels exist. He begins by describing the most fundamental stage, which is elementary reading. This is the level we learn in school. It's about recognizing words, understanding sentences, and grasping basic meaning. At this stage, the main question we ask is simple. What does this sentence say? It's mechanical. It's foundational. And while it's essential, it's only the starting point. But here's where things get interesting. Adler explains that real growth begins when we move beyond just understanding the words and start understanding the ideas behind them. That's where inspectional reading comes in. Inspectional reading is about getting the big picture before diving into the details. Instead of reading every word slowly from beginning to end, you learn to skim strategically. You look at the table of contents. You read the introduction. You glance at chapter summaries. You scan headings and key sections. The goal isn't depth yet, it's structure. Think of it like walking into a new city. Before exploring every street, you first want a map. You want to understand the layout. Where are the main roads? What's the overall design? Inspectional reading gives you that mental map of the book. It helps you understand what kind of book you're dealing with and what the author is trying to accomplish. Adler emphasizes that this step is often skipped. Many readers jump straight into detailed reading without knowing the book's overall argument. As a result, they get lost. They struggle to connect ideas because they don't see how everything fits together. Inspectional reading prevents that confusion. It prepares your mind. Then Adler introduces analytical reading, which is where things become truly active. Analytical reading is slow, careful, and intense. It's when you ask serious questions. What is the author's main argument? What problems is he trying to solve? What assumptions is he making? Are his conclusions logical? This level demands effort. It requires you to outline the book's structure in your own mind and engage with it critically. This is the level where reading transforms into thinking. You're no longer just absorbing ideas. You're evaluating them. You're testing them. You're making connections. And this process strengthens your ability to reason. Finally, Adler briefly introduces the highest level, syntopical reading. This is when you read multiple books on the same subject and compare them. Instead of focusing on just one author's perspective, you create a conversation between many authors. You analyze similarities, differences, and contradictions. At this level, you're not just learning from books. You're building your own understanding of a topic by synthesizing multiple viewpoints. What makes this chapter powerful is the realization that reading is not one size fits all. Different books require different levels of reading. A light novel doesn't demand the same approach as a philosophical work. A newspaper article doesn't require the same depth as a scientific text. Good readers adjust their level of effort based on their purpose and the complexity of the material. There's something liberating about this idea. You don't have to read every book with the same intensity. But when a book truly matters, when it has the potential to expand your mind, you now know how to approach it properly. Chapter 2 teaches us that better reading is a choice. It's about moving up the levels with intention. It's about recognizing that understanding doesn't happen automatically. It happens when you engage, question, and think. And once you become aware of these levels, you can never go back to reading the same way again. Adler shifts our focus to a skill that almost no one talks about, yet it can completely change the way you experience a book. He explains that before you read a book deeply, you should first learn how to inspect it properly. And this simple habit alone can save you hours of confusion and dramatically increase your understanding. Most of us open a book and immediately start reading page 1, line by line, as if we're following a strict rule. We feel guilty if we skip ahead. We believe that serious reading means reading every single word in order. But Adler challenges that belief. He says intelligent readers don't just start reading, they first examine the book. Think about it like meeting someone new. You wouldn't jump straight into a deep personal conversation without first understanding who they are, what they do, and what they care about. In the same way, before diving into a book's details, you should understand its structure, its purpose, and its overall argument. Adler calls this inspectional reading, and in this chapter, he explains how to do it properly. First, you look at the title and subtitle carefully. They often reveal the author's main focus. Then you study the table of contents. This gives you a clear outline of how the book is organized. It shows you the major sections and how the ideas are divided. Already, without reading deeply, you begin forming a mental map. Next, you read the preface or introduction. Authors often tell you exactly why they wrote the book and what problem they are trying to solve. Many readers skip this part, but it's one of the most valuable sections. It gives you insight into the author's intention. Then you skim through important chapters. Read the first and last few paragraphs. Glance at headings and subheadings. Notice repeated words or themes. If there are summaries at the end of chapters, read them. This isn't lazy reading. It's strategic reading. You're gathering clues. You're trying to answer one important question. What is this book really about? Adler also introduces the idea of setting a time limit for this inspection. Instead of casually flipping through pages, You give yourself a structured amount of time, maybe 15 or 30 minutes, to understand the book's framework. This forces your mind to stay focused and search for the core message. Why is this so powerful? Because once you understand the structure, detailed reading becomes much easier. You're no longer wandering through ideas blindly. You know where the author is going. You understand how each chapter fits into the bigger picture. And when you encounter difficult sections, you don't panic. You place them within the structure you've already built in your mind. There's also an emotional shift that happens here. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by a thick or complex book, you feel prepared. You feel in control. The book no longer intimidates you because you've already explored its landscape. Adler reminds us that inspectional reading doesn't replace deeper reading. It prepares you for it. It's like surveying the land before building a house. Without that preparation, you risk misunderstanding the foundation. Chapter 3 teaches us patience and strategy. It shows us that rushing into details without understanding the whole is one of the biggest mistakes readers make. And once you develop the habit of inspecting a book first, you'll notice something incredible. You'll read with more clarity, more confidence, and far less confusion. This chapter reinforces a powerful truth. Great readers don't just read harder, they read smarter. Adler takes us into the heart of what he calls analytical reading. And this is where reading truly becomes a serious intellectual activity. If inspectional reading gives you the map of the book, analytical reading is the journey itself. It's slow, careful, and deeply thoughtful. And most importantly, it requires effort. Adler makes something very clear here. Analytical reading is not passive. You cannot sit back and let the author do all the work. If you want to truly understand a book, especially a difficult or important one, you must actively engage with it. You must ask questions constantly. You must search for meaning. You must think. He explains that when you read analytically, your first responsibility is to understand what kind of book you are reading. Is it practical or theoretical? Is it trying to teach you how to do something? Or is it trying to explain how something works? This distinction matters because it changes how you interpret the content. A practical book gives advice and instructions. A theoretical book presents ideas and arguments. If you confuse the two, you misunderstand the author's purpose. Next, Adler emphasizes identifying the author's main argument. Every serious book has a central message. It might not be obvious at first, but it's there. Your job is to find it. What problem is the author trying to solve? What question is he answering? Until you can clearly state the main argument in your own words, you haven't truly understood the book. This is where many readers struggle. We often highlight beautiful sentences or powerful quotes, but we don't connect them to the larger argument. Analytical reading forces you to see how each part of the book supports the whole. You begin noticing how chapters build upon one another, how examples reinforce ideas, and how conclusions are formed. Adler also stresses the importance of understanding key terms. Authors often use specific words in very precise ways. If you misunderstand those terms, you misunderstand the entire argument. So analytical reading requires you to slow down and clarify definitions. What does the author mean by this word? Is he using it differently than I normally would? Then comes one of the most powerful parts of this chapter: learning how to evaluate the author fairly. Adler explains that before you criticize a book, you must first understand it completely. You cannot disagree intelligently until you can accurately restate the author's position. Only after that can you decide whether you agree or disagree, and why. He even outlines ways you can disagree properly. You might find that the author is uninformed, misinformed, illogical, or incomplete in his analysis. But notice something important here. Disagreement must be based on reason, not emotion. Analytical reading teaches discipline. It teaches you to separate feelings from logic. There's something empowering about this level of reading. You're no longer intimidated by big ideas or complex arguments. Instead, you approach them like a detective. You search for clarity. You break arguments into parts. You test them. And through this process, your own thinking becomes sharper. Adler reminds us that analytical reading takes time. It's not meant for every book. You don't need to analyze a light novel this way. But when you encounter a book that challenges you, a book that has the potential to expand your understanding of the world, this is the method you use. Chapter 4 shows us that reading is not about finishing quickly. It's about understanding deeply. It's about building a relationship with the author's ideas. And when you read at this level, something remarkable happens. You don't just gain knowledge. You strengthen your ability to think clearly, logically, and independently. This is where reading becomes transformative. Adler introduces us to the highest and most demanding level of reading, syntopical reading. And this is where reading moves beyond understanding a single book and becomes something much bigger. It becomes research. It becomes comparison. It becomes the art of building your own perspective by engaging with multiple minds at once. Up until now, we've talked about reading one book deeply, understanding its structure, identifying its arguments, analyzing its logic. But syntopical reading takes things to another level. Instead of asking, "What is this author saying?" you begin asking, "What do different authors say about the same subject?" And that question changes everything. Imagine you're interested in a topic like success, freedom, education, or human nature. You pick up one book and read it carefully. That's powerful. But then you pick up another book on the same subject, and then another. Suddenly you start noticing something fascinating. Authors agree on some points. They strongly disagree on others. They define key ideas differently. They approach the same problem from completely different angles. Syntopical reading is about entering that larger conversation. Adler explains that at this level, you don't let any single author control the discussion. Instead, you take control. You create a neutral framework for the topic. You identify the key questions that all the books are trying to answer. Then you compare how each author responds to those questions. This is challenging because it requires intense mental effort. You must understand each book well enough to represent its ideas fairly. You must avoid bias. You must resist the temptation to choose sides too quickly. Instead, you gather insights carefully, almost like a judge listening to multiple arguments before making a decision. What makes this level so powerful is that it transforms you from a consumer of ideas into a thinker. You're no longer simply absorbing someone else's conclusions. You're analyzing patterns across many perspectives. You're identifying agreements, contradictions, and gaps. And eventually, you begin forming your own well-reasoned viewpoint. Adler also reminds us that syntopical reading requires organization. You must define your subject clearly. You must decide which questions matter most. You must find relevant passages from different books and place them side by side. It's almost like conducting your own investigation. There's something deeply empowering about this. In a world filled with strong opinions and loud voices, syntopical reading teaches patience and balance. It teaches you not to accept the first argument you hear. It teaches you to explore widely before reaching conclusions. And perhaps most importantly, it builds intellectual independence. When you've studied multiple perspectives on a topic, you're far less likely to be easily influenced. You understand complexity. You appreciate nuance. You realize that truth is often layered and multifaceted. Adler makes it clear that not every reader will reach this level, and that's okay. Syntopical reading is demanding. It's usually reserved for serious learners, researchers, or anyone deeply passionate about a subject. But even knowing that this level exists expands your understanding of what reading can become. Chapter 5 completes the journey from basic reading to mastery. It shows us that reading isn't just about finishing books. It's about engaging in the great conversation of human thought. It's about learning from the best minds across time and bringing their ideas together in your own mind. At this level, reading becomes more than a habit. It becomes a lifelong intellectual adventure.